And one day, my dad is walking through the Alps of Switzerland. And all of a sudden, they bump into a group of Nazi officers. Those Nazi officers did not kill my father or maim him. They were very kind to my father. The sad thing is, one of them was Adolf Hitler. I'm Cliff. What's your name?
Great to meet you. I'm Eli.
Eli. Good. I like your name, sir.
Thank you. It's biblical. I'm Jewish.
Great. I worship a Jew.
Well, I think so as well. So we got that in common. I'm curious how you think about what in the Bible is metaphorical and what you think is absolute truth.
You bet. Jesus says to a Pharisee named Nicodemus, you have to be born again. And Nicodemus is too literal in his interpretation of what Jesus says. And Nicodemus says, right, I'm supposed to climb back into my mother's womb, pass down a birth canal, and be born again? No, Nick. Jesus is talking about a spiritual birth, not a physical birth. So obviously we have to allow a speaker or a writer to use metaphor, simile, analogy, allegory. And you find that throughout the Bible. You obviously have to allow an author or speaker to use historical narrative.
How do you differentiate?
By studying literary style. Once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wynken, Blynken, and Nod took a boat ride. Obviously that's mythology. At this time in this place, with these people around, this happened. Reads like the New York Times or the LA Times. That's eyewitness reportage.
Otherwise, it's metaphorical.
No. If it is eyewitness reportage claiming to be, then you have to go on and you have to study such things as archaeology. Is archaeology supportive of these place names?
Great. With a lot of things in the Bible, people take things from older times and try and transpose them to modernity. And we might feel that they're not so accurate anymore. We might want gay marriage in our societies, for instance.
Yeah.
We might say the injunctions against that were either metaphorical or historically irrelevant, specific, localized to that time period.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you'd respond.
Moses claimed that God was giving the 10 Commandments. One God, no others. Don't make an idol. Don't abuse God's name. Respect the Sabbath and worship God. Honor your mother and father. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie, and do not covet. Those are not the 10 suggestions that are culturally bound to a particular culture. Those are transcendent values coming from an eternal God whose character is good and holy, and he's communicating in a way that you and I, with the rational minds that he's given us and the consciences that we have, can understand.
I'm a bit confused about our ability to understand God's will, because we can be led away from God and led towards sin. So how do we know when we've actually approximated what God wants?
You don't have to worry about that too much, because you got a very sharp mind and you have a conscience. And by exercising your mind and your conscience and engaging in self-analysis, engaging in and analyzing how other people cheat each other, work each other over in order to get to the corporate ladder, you don't have to have a PhD in ethics to figure out, that's really wrong.
My conscience, given by God, I believe in as well as a Jew,
Yes.
to determine which parts of the Bible ought to be taken literally and which parts ought to be taken metaphorically.
No, it has nothing to do with conscience.
But
You don't go into English class and decide what's metaphor, what's symbolic, by using your conscience. You use your conscience to determine what is right and wrong, not what is metaphor or what is poetry. Instead, you study literary style and you come up with a conclusion. This is an accurate description of metaphor, this is an accurate description of scientific literature, and this is an accurate description of historical narrative.
So it's a combination of reasons and conscience that allow us to get to modern ethics and change from what the Bible might have said we do 2,000 years ago, which allows for adaptation and transformation and modernity. I.e., we're not fundamentalists. I don't think you're a fundamentalist either, right?
Well, what on earth does that word fundamentalist mean?
That you read the word in the Bible and you assume, I would say perhaps arrogantly, not you specifically, one, that we know exactly what God intended and that we can transpose that understanding on other people rather than remaining more pluralistic, more open.
Really? Are you open to me owning a slave?
No, not at all. My ethics don't issue directly from God. My ethics are intersubjective, and we agree collectively together that owning slaves is wrong.
Good.
And we've decided that over the course of centuries, looking at historical injustices.
I'm just real glad we don't live at the time of the Dred Scott decision, aren't you?
Yeah, that's why.
Because that was the majority.
I think that morality is iterative. That's why we constantly need to be improving and critiquing, rather than accepting one book as endless ultimate truth and assuming that we know exactly the way that it ought to be interpreted.
I'm sorry, I never heard myself say that, what you just said.
Well, I think that you were not.
Well, then why are you misquoting me?
Well, I thought you weren't super clear about what we should know is exactly true from the Bible and what is metaphorical, and I thought you were interpreting it just as towards your own interests.
No, I was talking simply about the Ten Commandments, and I said that they're not the 10 suggestions. They are outside of culture, coming from an eternal God who is just, and he gave us the 10 Commandments. That's all I said.
Just to be clear, how do you know that?
How do I know that?
Yeah.
The way I know that is, first of all, by reading the Gospels and seeing that the evidence, historical in nature, points to Jesus being reliable. Secondly, I put my faith in Christ. I experience his trustworthiness in my life personally. Thirdly, I notice that his view of the Old Testament is that it is the Word of God. And I trust that Jesus is in touch with reality. He died and rose from the dead. You die and rise from the dead. I'm going to listen very carefully to everything you have to say. All right, he dies, rise from the dead. So I'm going to listen very carefully to what Jesus has to say. He treated the Old Testament as the Word of God. He repeats the 10 Commandments in his teachings. So I hold to them as from God, because Jesus did, because he is trustworthy.
My critique is about the ability, or the assumption rather, that we can understand God's will through a book. And for me, I interpret morality more as unfolding over the course of history.
Okay.
There's a quote I like actually from this book, Reading for Class, Tocqueville, that I know without the Creator raising his voice that the stars follow the arc that his finger has traced through the stars. That over the course of history, following these injustices, slaveries, genocides, etc., we can see what God's will is. And that it might change over time, rather than just one specific book. I think that's less dogmatic.
When is the abuse of an innocent child ever God's will?
I think that, for me, the personal answer, and I'm curious what you think about it, is that one, we live in a world where that allows for evil, and that comes from freedom, and I think that that's a form of kindness. Kindness doesn't always mean something that's easy. Kindness can be harsh sometimes. Kindness can be truth. Secondly, I think that the fact that we have freedom and the fact that evil exists is a commandment on all of us to stand up and fight for justice. And so, when people do wrong things, like deny people the right to love who they want to love, it's incumbent on us to stand up and speak out for that right.
Well, Jesus Christ never says, and the Bible never says, that we can't love anybody. In fact, Christ commands the opposite. Christ commands us to love everybody and to love even our enemies.
So you support gay marriage?
How on earth do you jump from what I was saying to gay marriage?
You said that we can love anyone.
Yeah, I didn't say we can have sex with anyone. I didn't say that I can have sex with her and him and him. I didn't say that, okay? That's not my point. So how on earth do you get from love to automatically to gay marriage?
My agenda is to push on your beliefs.
Thank you for your honesty.
Well, I thought that's what you wanted.
I do.
Okay, so we're on the same page here.
We're on the same point on that point.
Okay.
And we read in Genesis.
Could you quote it for me?
Yes. For this reason, in Genesis 2:24 we read, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." And in Genesis 1:27 we read, God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them.
My problem is that you've got this book, and you're inferring that our limited human minds can extract absolute eternal knowledge from it about things that don't exist really at that time period.
I am out here to talk about Jesus Christ and promote Christ, not Western society.
Okay, well, my version of ethics, instead of issuing from, in my view, arrogant assertions about what God intended...
That's incredibly
that we can't
judgmental
know,
for you to say.
well, yeah, you're making judgments as well.
No,
about
I'm
what gay
not.
people can do.
I'm saying 1 + 1 = 2. And you don't know my motive. You have no idea. The same way if I tell him 1 + 1 does not equal 3, it equals 2. That is not necessarily arrogance on my part.
Sounds a lot like
Maybe there is arrogance, but it's a truth claim. Sir, 1 + 1 does not equal 3 or 5, it equals 2. That is a truth claim. And for you to be so judgmental that you would come out here and accuse me, who you don't know very well, of being judgmental, Whoa, Jack, where are you getting off?
Well, I think you wanted people to come up here and accuse you. Well, here's the logical mistake.
Okay.
You're going from mathematical 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
There's absolute truth, and you're trying to apply that to literary analysis.
No, I'm not.
Down to modern law.
No, that's not what I was doing. You misunderstood me. I'm
Then
sorry.
Explain me. Explain it.
I was making a statement that there is a difference between a truth claim versus a motive, be it arrogance, humility, kindness, or unkindness.
Do you think you have perfect reason?
I know that I do not have perfect reason. Do you?
Absolutely not. So how do you know? And that's why I invest my faith in all of these people here to figure out ethics together. But if you know you don't have perfect reason, how do you know that you can interpret the Bible accurately? Couldn't you err? I mean,
I err every day.
So how do you know that your interpretation of the Bible is correct?
Because the evidence is that Jesus Christ is reliable. The evidence is that Jesus Christ and the Bible say that God created sex as a beautiful gift to enjoy within the context of a marriage between a man and a woman.
How do you know that interpretation?
I've answered you, and it's getting real old now. Okay, bud? Good to meet you,
Great
Eli.
to meet you.
Take care.
Great to meet you.
For the idea of God purely as the ultimate creator of the world, is it appropriate to ever label him as good or evil? Secondly, does God ever have to have a reason to whether to allow something to happen, whether it's something bad to happen for a good reason?
If we're granting God to be as large as he is and omniscient, then he's going to have reasons to allow suffering and to actually use suffering in our lives, like the ripple effect philosophically, that we probably know nothing about. Other times it might become understandable why he allows suffering or why perhaps he even brings it into our lives. I believe that scripturally speaking, you see God act differently throughout time. So he's not acting the exact same way in a theocratic society than he does today in the 21st century.
The idea of God being the ultimate creator in general, like nothing else to it, we have our own conception of good. But to me, it may seem to be weird that we put this very human notion of what good is. Generally, it's very much of a human construct as we see it change over time. But is it ever appropriate that we label such a being to be good or bad in general?
Well, see, that kind of is connected with this guy's point over here. He kept talking about reason and how we need to have perfect reason to understand the Bible. Well, as an atheist, where does he get reason from? So you're telling me that you get a rational, reasonable mind that seeks after truth from something like just being an accident, from something like coming from the evolutionary process? I believe in microevolution, but that's absolutely ridiculous. So how you even come to understanding objective goodness or things like kindness and other virtues, if you're an atheist, there's no standard by which to judge that other than what he was saying, which is, oh, let's just go around and take a vote on what goodness truly is and what it's not. But let's not talk about Nazi Germany and how they interpreted what goodness was, because that's scary, because we know that this wouldn't work, what he's talking about, if we actually truly looked into the lens of the past.
General, like, there are atheists out there. Would you say that either they have some sort of presupposed Christian morality that's guiding them that they don't know of or unaware of, or they just aren't very moral agents in general?
Nietzsche said that. He said, if you are living a compassionate, loving life where you seek after things like human rights, he was the most ticked with those types of atheists because he said, you are not being honest with your atheism. You're just adopting Judeo-Christian values and calling yourself an atheist. Look, that's consistent. That's like Aldous Huxley talking about his Philosophy 101 class and saying, the reason why I don't believe in God, I know is because of an emotional bias. Because I cannot sleep with whoever I want to sleep if I'm understanding biblical ethics. That's consistent. Nietzsche was consistent. Huxley was consistent as atheists. There's endless amounts of atheists, and I hate to keep picking on the guy who was just right here, but I thought there were so many inconsistencies within his atheism, agnosticism, and that he wasn't being honest with it when it came to things like reason or consciousness.
So, I fundamentally believe that, I should be morally a good person because I know we mentioned reasoning, but by reason, I believe that there should be the least amount of suffering in this world. Because if I'm mean to others, this causes more suffering and more suffering, and I don't believe that's good. So I want to be a good person, but what if I say I don't choose to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I choose to live my life in a way that is virtuous and is morally good? And a lot of the answers that I get is okay, if you don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, then you don't believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ, then you don't end up in this like better place after death. And I'm wondering why that this is such a pinnacle issue. Like if I choose to be a morally good person, why when I'm evaluating it and compared to someone who believes in the teachings of Jesus Christ, like let's say we both, from the outside, we're both equally good. We both live our lives morally good.
Yep.
But he believed in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Does
Yep.
that mean that he or she ends up in heaven in comparison to me?
You are one thoughtful gentleman, as well as obviously very intelligent. Thank you for raising that difficult issue, okay? First point. I'm a fan of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn, the Russian, thought rich people are really warped. Poor people, lower class people, are really good. Then Solzhenitsyn was thrown into a gulag in Siberia. And he was among blue-collar people. And all of a sudden, Solzhenitsyn realized these blue-collar poor people are just as corrupt as those rich elitists who I used to live with. That is exactly what Jesus taught. Jesus taught that it's the heart of the human being. Doesn't matter whether they're rich, poor, what their ethnic heritage is, what their socioeconomic status is, what their educational level is. We all have good, we all have evil. One quick example. My father grew up in Switzerland. He was there during World War II. But before World War II, my father was a Swiss Boy Scout. And one day, my dad is walking through the Alps of Switzerland. And all of a sudden, they bump into a group of Nazi officers. Those Nazi officers did not kill my father or maim him. They were very kind to my father. The sad thing is, one of them was Adolf Hitler, vacationing in the Alps of Switzerland. Hitler did some good things. He didn't slap my father around, but then he went out and gassed Jews in Dachau and Auschwitz and Buchenwald. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example. But if you've ever worked in a daycare center, sir, or watched little children, they can be precious as can be. And then they can be little devils. And I hate to admit this, but when I was 4 years old, in the sandbox, I was having a great time with my buddy, and all of a sudden he did something I didn't like. Picked up a metal truck and dropped it on the guy's head. I had never seen that behavior modeled for me. Nobody had ever taught me that. It came very naturally to me. You bug me, I'm going to drop my metal truck on your head. That's one of the reasons I believe in Jesus. Because we're not these good people. I mean, guys, I really wish you guys would think I'm the greatest. I mean, I'm just an incredible guy. I'm really good. But sir, I'd be lying through my teeth. That is why I need Jesus Christ. Now, the question that you got right to is, did he rise from the dead? And you're absolutely right. That's the crux of the matter. The best reason to believe he did not rise from the dead is because there's no supernatural God, and therefore there's no possibility of a dead man rising from the dead. But my question is, why do you hold so tightly to that assumption that there's no supernatural God? If there is a supernatural God, a resurrection is totally plausible. No supernatural God, you're an idiot to think there's a resurrection, right? So now you got to study the historical evidence. Does the historical evidence point to Jesus dying, being buried, and rising from the dead, or does it not?
Wait, so would you say that, like, specifically following the teachings of Jesus Christ is a method of evaluating if you're being morally a good person, in comparison to me, like, blindly living my life and being like, okay, I think I'm being good now, and I think I'm not being good now. But following specifically the teachings of Jesus Christ is like more of like an evaluation framework for me to be like, okay, according to this, I'm good. And according to this, I am bad.
I believe there's a cultural piece to it, and there's also a great experiential, emotional piece to it. And so when you look at the Roman Empire, where it was all about the powerful eating the weak, and they laughed at this idea of forgiving your enemies, of during the Great Plagues actually going out into the countryside and saving people who were dying. Only the Christians were doing that, who were of different ethnicities. Or, for example, the Greeks, who said clearly is consistent with Plato and Aristotle that you were to have slaves and denigrate them, versus all of a sudden the world changes. Even Luc Ferry, the incredible atheist, best-selling author, talks about this. As soon as the understanding of all are created in the image of God swept through the known world, value to each and every human being shifted. Now all of a sudden, little girls were being taken off of dump heaps. Now all of a sudden, human rights were invented. Now all of a sudden, actually sacrificing your own life began. So I wouldn't come to Jesus' morals and just say, nah, they're objectively true and you just need to follow them. No, I think they jive most with our culture. I think they jive most with your own emotions, probably. And I think if we didn't have a Judeo-Christian value system that fortunately here in the West has influenced most of the world, not all of the world, but most of the world, we would be in trouble as a human species. So I do not believe in the Christian faith because of these great morals, but it is a piece where that makes sense most to me. I think you look at other human beings, and it's not just a social construct to say, I should sacrifice for that boy in Myanmar who's starving to death. No, I don't believe that's a social construct. Because if you went over there and you said, I'm going to save, for example, this woman in Africa who is being, her genitals are being mutilated. Well, those who are head of the tribe might say to you, screw off. I mean, you're part of this Western understanding of everybody has equal rights. No, we say women are lower than man, and so genital mutilation is a fine thing. So get your Western ideals out of here. No, I believe you would appeal to a law above the law, that there is objective morality and objective value to all people. And so I hope you wouldn't just go home with your head in your hands saying, oh, they were right, I was wrong. So I'm actually quoting right now to the New York Times, a secular humanist, she was a big part of this organization, who did that very thing and had to leave and say, I don't believe in the Christian faith and that there is a God, but she said that does make the most sense of how to handle this difficult situation.
So when we sin, like if we lie or steal, don't we need to ask the person we hurt in the situation for forgiveness? Why do we need to ask God for forgiveness when we hurt the other person?
It's not something where we just look up at the sky and say, well, that one forgives me and I don't owe the person that I wronged an apology. That's at least the idea of the image of God is upon the individual. Now, when Elon Musk said that the voice of the majority is the voice of God, I think that billionaire space guy is wrong. I don't think it is the majority that makes the decision. As much as we have our democratic ideals about the majority guiding us in some way, it's not the majority. Neither is it the individual. When I say you ought not to do that to me, am I just appealing to myself in that? Am I appealing to you, or am I appealing to the majority? In some sense, no, absolutely not. I'm appealing to something outside, something transcendent out of all of us. Right? And that's where I'm going to say, well, that might be why I need to first go and apologize to the person I wronged before I go and do anything to any God. Part of what the appeal of that verse in Scripture is, logically, is if I claim to love a God who I can't see, but hate a person who I can see, how can the love of God be in me? Like, let's not play tricks here. Let's not go at it. And so that's where it's very important to think through, well, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. That's great. When you have a kamikaze, someone with a martyr complex, it breaks down then. So what happens then? Well, we have to appeal to something outside of all of us, again, to kind of get back to, well, there was a clear wrong done here. And you can't just go saying, well, it's just because God's on my side and not your side, and therefore I can say no. It's first go to that person before you go make an offering to God.
It seems like philosophers through the ages, when they've tried to investigate metaphysics, have tried to give an account of sort of the universal,
Right.
That which transcends the particular and the individual, and hence the contingent.
Yeah.
Right. Isn't there kind of a problem when we identify God, the supreme principle, as a personal being, because we then introduce a sort of formal distinction between this being God and then the rest of reality, right? Or how would you respond to that, I guess?
Okay. He and I are separate beings.
Right.
And if I try and meld my fist into his cheek, that is evil. Because he has his own body, his own identity, and I have my own body and my own identity. And God gave me this hand not to mold it into his cheek in a fist as I hit him, but instead to use my hand and my mind to respect him, to help him in any way that I can, especially if he's starving. So I don't buy into it's a problem for him to have his own reality and for me to have my own reality. No, he is real. I am real. Now the challenge is for us to learn to get along. The challenge is for us to live at peace and to love each other.
It was more of a metaphysical question.
Yeah.
When we're trying to give an account of that which grounds all of the particular beings,
Yes.
don't we need to invoke something which is universal and hence not personal in particular?
I don't feel any
Right.
need to do that at all. That's not why I believe in God. Why do you feel a need to do that? Explain that.
To give a complete account of reality.
By doing what?
Is by trying to investigate that which is universal. It seems like these different traditional philosophic systems had conceptions of some sort of universal,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not sure that the Christian conception admits of that.
I am not her, and she's not me.
Right.
Therefore, if I hold back and slap her in the face, that is evil. That is not part of God hitting part of God. That's not this part of reality trying to get along with this part of reality. No. When I hit her or denigrate her in any way, that is evil, because she has her own life and body, and I have my own life and body, and I better learn to respect her and love her, not to be disrespectful and denigrate her. And the whole idea that we're all just one, that wipes out the basis for ethics. Because if we're all one and I slap him, what just happened? Part of God just slapped part of God. There's nothing wrong with that. We're both part of God. We're both one. Whap, whap, whap. Nothing wrong. We're just part of God. And I think that is ridiculous. And that is why I do not buy into monism, that everything is part of God, everything's one. No, I respect him. And him is not me. In fact, we have different ethnic heritages. Obviously. Okay? But I insist he is still a human being created in the image of God, and I'm still a human being created in the image of God, and if I denigrate him in any way, that is evil. Because God, who is separate from him and separate from me, created him with dignity. He's created in the image of God.
I would say I'm agnostic because I haven't been convinced, even though you all have made very compelling points, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on what you mean by order and design and how that argument works.
Absolutely. So there's order and design in nature. There's order and design in your body. I mean, if one chromosome or one DNA strand were to be different in your body, you could be Down syndrome, or you could not even exist. And there are a lot of DNA in your body. Okay, that's order, for example. Where else is order? There's order if you step into a lab on this campus. You have to deal with constants before even any type of experimentation. So when a scientist comes and says, hey, let's duplicate or even create our own DNA cell. Okay, well, he's a creator creating this for one, so it's not creating itself. If it was creating itself, then you wouldn't need a creator. That's just the first, though. The second is he's dealing with constants. He's dealing with constants that have to be set up, values that have to be set up, even before he comes into trying to split a DNA cell. So those are a few pieces, but there's endless amounts of more. Even having a rational discussion, that involves order. You cannot have a rational, reasonable brain if it just pops out of nowhere from the irrational. You cannot have a personhood, a personal nature, an ability to love if there's not some form of loving creator giving you that ability, because if there wasn't that loving creator, you would just be a moist robot. That's all you would be. So you wouldn't have the ability to have free will to make that decision ultimately to love. So there are endless amounts of categories when it comes to purpose, design, creation. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this episode. Hit that subscribe button. We love for you to join the family. Also, want to invite you to our church in New Canaan, Connecticut. It's New Canaan High School, and it meets Sundays at 9:30 a.m.